multitasking.
Always.
All right, I'm going to straighten you all out tonight.
Uh-oh.
Third word in verse 1 is going to be our highlighted word today. Discipline.
Oh, boy.
Proverbs chapter 12. Here we go. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. That's how the NIV translates it. Good people obtain favor from the Lord, but he condemns those who devise wicked schemes. No one can be established through wickedness, but the righteous cannot be uprooted. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay in his bones. The plans of the righteous are just, but the advice of the wicked is deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the speech of the upright rescues them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous stands firm. A person is praised according to their prudence, and one with a warped mind is despised. Better to be a nobody and yet have a servant than pretend to be somebody and have no food. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. The wicked desire the stronghold of evildoers, but the root of the righteous endures. Evildoers are trapped by their sinful talk, and so the innocent escape trouble. From the fruit of their lips people are filled with good things, and the work of their hands brings them reward. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. An honest witness tells the truth, but a false witness tells lies. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. Deceit is in the hearts of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy. No harm overtakes the righteous, but the wicked have their fill of trouble. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. The prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. The lazy do not roast any game, but the diligent feed on the riches of the hunt. In the way of righteousness there is life, along that path is immortality. So in chapter 12, once again, we have, line after line after line. In some cases they match up, in other cases the topic or the theme shifts. Still, obviously, how the wise should live, how the foolish live. And there's several different verses in here, or words also, that kind of relate to that idea of discipline. And so each chapter, especially the last few, I've kind of picked a highlighted topic to take a look at. And tonight's highlighted topic is discipline. And there's three different things that we could talk about. If we don't have time to talk about all three, then probably the second or third ones will come up again anyway. So if we kind of get into time here, I think I'll get through the first two before we get into our discussion time. I don't know that I'll get into the third one. So the three topics are the idea of disciplining oneself. The second one is how we discipline another person. And the third one is how another person disciplines us. And so we're going to take those one at a time. Talk first about this idea of disciplining oneself. 1 Corinthians 9:27, I discipline my body. One version of that says I beat my body and make it my slave. In this particular version, which I think is RSV, so this is not NIV, but 1 Corinthians 9:27, Paul says, I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified for. I read this and I thought, I'd never heard this before, and I probably heard it the first time about a year ago, and I've heard it a couple times since, is this illustration. Think about this for a minute. Statistically, if someone practices this, they have the highest probability of being successful. And so we're talking about discipline, and this goes right in line with discipline, but this idea is statistically, when they do studies on people and how successful they are, it basically says the highest probability of them being successful is by this one particular action. And it is delayed gratification.
I agree.
The idea of putting off something pleasurable for the work today or the responsibility today, with the idea that if I delay my gratification until later, take one thing, for instance, in saving money, is if you can't save money, then it's hard to build wealth. Mm-hmm. And the idea of saving money is delayed gratification, rather than getting your check like some do and going out and just spending it all on Friday night and it's gone. You delay the gratification by paying your bills, taking care of your responsibilities, ultimately, saving, things of that nature. So statistically, if someone practices delayed gratification, they have the highest possibility of being successful. And that basically is the idea of learning how to discipline oneself. And it's not always easy. There's different words in chapter 12 which point to the disciplining yourself. The first one is diligence. So verse 14 says, the work of their hands brings them reward. And so the idea of diligence and persistent effort and steady attention towards something, which is basically what diligence means, is the idea of I'm going to continue to do this even if I sometimes don't enjoy it, because I know that there's going to be success at the end. It's the idea of stick-to-itiveness is a word we use. It's a part of delayed gratification. When I talk to young people about being successful, sometimes I will say, what is something that you really like to do? And they'll say, well, like, I want to play basketball, I want to go to the NBA, or I want to be a doctor or something like that. And I'll look at them and I'll say, you know what it takes to do that? And it kind of catches them, and they'll be like, what? And years ago, I read a book by an author who does short little works. And this one, I've not always liked his works, but Malcolm Caldwell wrote a book entitled Outliers. And I thought it was a fascinating book. And he talked about how people become successful. And one chapter is on, it's the idea of 10,000 hours. And diligence is basically being committed enough to do the same thing over and over and over again in order to become an expert at it. Because the theory, and it's more than a theory, I think it's mostly fact, although there's some other things that are combined to this, is in order to be an expert at something, you need to spend 10,000 hours working at it. Mm-hmm. And that works out to like 2 hours a day, every day for, I think it's 7 years in order to get to that 10,000 hour mark. Now there's other things. One of them is directed practice, the idea that you will be able to take direction from other people, and the idea of other people disciplining you kind of comes into, where they tell you what you're doing wrong so that you'll figure out how to do it right. But to be an expert at something is to be disciplined enough, to be diligent, and Proverbs is very high on that idea of diligence. It's also high on the idea of the word prudence, which is the idea of sound judgment and careful decision making. You will see that word prudent several times in chapter 12. Another word that pops up in regards to disciplining oneself is obviously righteousness. Is you can discipline yourself towards the wrong things. You can learn how to pick locks so you can break into people's houses. You can become an expert at picking locks and spend 10,000 hours, but it's not a righteous endeavor if you're going to break into people's homes. Mary. And the other one is that the idea of trustworthiness comes up in chapter 12 also. And so to discipline yourself, diligence, prudence, righteousness, trustworthiness are the four words that kind of come up in this regard of, in chapter 12, to discipline oneself. Then there's the idea of us disciplining another person. And you guys may have heard this illustration before because I've told it in a variety of different settings. But when I was a youth pastor in Pennsylvania, I had a kid in my youth group who kind of went sideways, and he became very, very rebellious. His parents were active in the church. His brother was one of my best leaders in the youth group, but he himself was really struggling at a point in his life. And he got to 16 or 17, and he ends up in a juvenile detention center because of his actions. So I drove down to visit him and to talk with him, and I was attempting to, as gently as possible, kind of hope that I could re-guide him. And he was having none of it, you know, and he said, Pastor Matt, I don't need to listen to you. He said, I don't need to listen to my parents. I don't need to listen to the police. I don't need to listen to anybody at school. I don't need to listen to anyone. And I was kind of at that point a bit exasperated. And I said, well, then, Paul, what are you going to do with your life? You know, because you see people like that, they just go sideways. And he had a direct answer right away. He said, I'm going to join the army.
That's right.
And I've always looked back on that and thought to myself is, when we're trying to discipline someone, we have to hope that they're striving for wisdom. And when you have somebody who can't listen to anybody but he wants to join the army, then that's kind of the definition of what a foolish person is doing. And you hope that they break out of that, you know, as a result of being a young person, because juvenile detention center at 16 unfortunately ends up as, you know, prison and all sorts of problems later on in life. But when we're disciplining another person, one of the questions I asked in regards to us, how we discipline another, is biblically we are called to discipline one another, to, in different way, shape, and form, if somebody's gone off the rails, to, you know, confront them, communicate with them. And then the question becomes is, what are some of the biblical practices we are encouraged to do as we seek to discipline one another? And I'll just mention 5 different ones that Scripture lays out. The first one is humility. Matthew 7 talks about the speck. First remove the log in your own eye before you attempt to communicate with your brother about the speck in his. Prayer, of course, is asking God for wisdom and direction because we're doing something that's quite difficult, especially in our culture that we are very individualistic in American culture, and the idea of telling somebody else that they're wrong is much more difficult for us than I think in other settings and other cultures because of our individualism. Gentleness, Galatians chapter 6 talks about, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. So humility, prayer, gentleness when we discipline another person, self-reflection. The end of that verse, Galatians 6:1 that I just read, says, keep watch on yourself. And so the interesting thing is, I think that if you're not careful and you're arrogant about confronting or disciplining someone else, and you're not self-reflective about it, the Scripture says you may fall into sin as well. And then the last one is the idea, and this one I'll spend a couple minutes on because it's interesting. What are some of the biblical practices we are encouraged to do as we seek to discipline another? And it's to rebuke. Luke 17:3, pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. So here's the difficulty. Galatians 6:1 says, restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Luke 17:3, which is Jesus talking, it says, if your brother sins, rebuke him. So be gentle and also rebuke. And so the question becomes, how do you do that? And what I want to kind of challenge is, I think in our culture, at least what I've seen, is people have a hard time with the word rebuke. It seems like it's very, very strong. Like you're yelling at somebody because they did something wrong. And that's not what the word means. The word actually means to set a value upon or to assess a penalty. Now, in our culture, who assesses a penalty?
A judge.
A judge. The other one is in sports, an umpire. So someone who assesses a penalty is the person who says there is something that's supposed to be done right and it's been done wrong. That's really basically what rebuke means. It's not an emotional term, because we tend to think of it, I think, as an emotional, rebuke. We're rebuking somebody, or the way hellfire and brimstone preaching is done. Rebuking sounds like a very strong word, but it's basically just placing a value upon what's being done. That it's either a positive thing or it's a negative thing, placing a value on it. In a culture, not only that's individualistic, but in a culture that believes there's no real belief system at all, that's difficult because you're placing a value on something. You're assessing something to be either right or wrong, and then you're basically placing a penalty in your mind on what the person has done as wrong, and you're letting them know that this penalty is in effect in their life. So in effect, you are doing something that the umpire would do, or something that the referee would do, except in a spiritual sense. You are telling the person, time out, you've done something wrong, you need to go to the penalty box. In effect, that's what a rebuke is. So it's not really an emotionally strong word. It's more recognizing when a wrong has been done and assessing a value on the action. The value is either positive or in this case it's negative. And then so we have disciplining ourselves, disciplining one another. And so I don't have a whole lot on this one, so I'll do the third one. It may come up again, is another disciplining us. So you have to invert everything we just talked about and say, okay, how do you feel when this is done to you? When somebody is asking or telling you that they are assessing a penalty on you because they feel you've done something wrong. Verse 15 in chapter 12 says this, the wise listen to advice. And then we'll talk about this during our discussion time, is why is it so hard for us at times to receive discipline, and what practice or interior work can we do to help us receive discipline more easily? So self-disciplining, discipline ourselves, us disciplining someone else, another person disciplining us, and how we receive that. That's going to be up for discussion after our break.
Okay.
All right, what are your thoughts regarding the idea of disciplining oneself, the idea of delayed gratification? Let's start with that one.
think half the time you delayed gratification. Half the time you want something, you delay that want, and after you think about it, you really, it's like, well, that was really kind of stupid. I really didn't need that. I don't need that. It's it's more of the instant fulfilling of a want. You have to. I think you have to discern: is it a want or is it a need? Is it icing on the cake or is it bread for the table kind of thing?
Well, I think too it's learned. I think like when my kids were little, if they worked and saved up money for something, they had to check prices at 3 different places. They had to wait 2 weeks. They had to pray about it. And then oftentimes they wouldn't even buy what they were thinking. So it taught them to...
You ruined all the fun
I
for
did,
them.
yeah. But it teaches them, because I think sometimes if kids always get what they want right away, they don't learn that. I think there's adults probably that aren't good at delayed gratification.
Yes.
It has to be like a discipline that we learn, I think.
Yeah, and the whole idea of train up a child in the way they should go. If you don't teach delayed gratification, I don't think people make very good adults. Right. It's a real problem because then they have a very difficult time. In fact, I won't name the organization, but there was an organization in the last 10 years that came out with like these new commandments, new rules. And one of them was suppressing the idea of delayed gratification, that just wasn't necessarily needed in our culture. And I just thought, boy, if you start teaching that to everybody, we already do teach it too much to begin with. Mm-hmm. If you celebrate the absence of delayed gratification, oh my, that's just not a good idea.
No.
Well, and sports are good for that with kids, or music, because they're not always going to be the best, and they have to work at it to get better. And so I think that helps them too.
Almost anything that requires discipline, requires, like a stick-to-itiveness, is one of the things when our boys were in things, whether it was music or sports or theater or what have you, is once they had made a commitment, they had to follow through. Mm-hmm. Right. You can't start something and then decide halfway through you don't like it, so you quit. There has to be a discipline to stick it out. It's not going to last forever. The season's going to be over eventually. And I actually only ever broke that rule once, and it was basically because the coach and several dads got into a fight in the parking lot. And it was just the most negative experience of our life. And I just, my son said, I don't want to do this anymore. I said, that's fine, because this is not a healthy environment. That's okay.
Well, I think instant gratification is the new god of the current age. I mean, look at it. I mean, everything now is, if we can't have it right now, why, something's wrong.
Well, in Madison Avenue, kind of commercials and everything that pushes that all the time is you want it, and you want it now, and you need to have it now in order for you to be happy. Yeah.
Well, you think of, we were at our daughter's down in Ohio, and they have an Amazon fulfillment center. There was something she was going to order. She ordered it. It was there in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's it's like, I remember as a kid having the J.C. Penney and Sears Roebuck catalogs. That is, you'd flip through, whether it be school clothes or the Christmas book, and it just, I think it also kind of heightened that sense of surprise, when we were kids.
Anticipation is a worthwhile emotion to have. It really is, to wait and to have that feeling of expectation of it's eventually going to be here, but not right away. Yeah.
I think some of the decorating shows, I won't name any particular couples that have had a popular show, and they made it so that young people getting their first homes and stuff, the home had to be perfection before they could even move in.
Huh. Yeah.
And, that was a
And they would,
disservice,
and
really.
it would happen in a 1 hour show.
Yeah, in a 1 hour show.
Yeah.
So
Instead of,
it can't be that hard,
Yeah.
And so people get this very disjointed idea of what their life should be like.
Yeah.
I should have all of it now. Yeah. Well,
Don't you think that's happened kind of with the younger generation is they see their parents, they have these nice houses and furniture
Yes,
and all the toys or whatever they, the things they participate in, and they think they need to have all those things right now.
Yeah.
And they go into debt.
Well, Dave
For
Ramsey
it.
said that. He said the kids these days, they want the things that it took 30 years for their parents to obtain, whether it be the house or...
And they finance it to get it.
well, and one other difficulty that we're actually going to run in the next 20 years, and I just find this unfortunately fascinating, is we are going through the greatest wealth transfer in the history of the world, with the baby boomers passing on over the next, they're now average age is 60 to 80 is the baby boomers, richest generation in the history of the world, most money in their 401s and everything else, and they're going to be passing on, and they're going to be passing that money down to children and grandchildren, and you're already starting to see it, where you have young people who have not had to work for it and are just receiving money. And you hear stories about things like the lottery. Lottery is a fascinating example of instant gratification and what happens to a person when suddenly somebody hands them $40 million, and what they do and how they can destroy their life with it. So.
you had mentioned sports too for, discipline. I think even individual sports is even takes more discipline. Like people running a 10K or something, and you're going to train for it for 6 months. So there's no gratification until that one day that it's over. And then you have to really know how to handle that one day too, because that gratification lasts 10 minutes. So then there's always that decline too with the instant with gratification that takes a long time. You can also have that drop off of your enthusiasm. But then you just have to get back on it and do it again.
Well, and that's
Start over.
When we were earlier, I thought of when we were talking about that idea is where does that chiefly lie as far as how we make decisions regarding either delayed or instant gratification, and that's a heart issue according to Scripture. The Hebrew understanding of the heart was the will and the emotions. Now think about how those two work together when it comes to instant or delayed gratification. Is if the emotions override, then you just say, I want it and I want it now. The will has to override the emotions to be able to say, I can train for 6 months even though I get no. Now, it doesn't mean you don't get any gratification, because, there is gratification as you accomplish and as your time gets better and that sort of thing. So there is gratification along the way. However, you are definitely, anytime you discipline yourself, work, sport, hobby, no matter what it is, you are always putting something off for tomorrow's reward. And that requires you, because emotionally, it's oftentimes you want to quit. It's just like, wow, I'm saving all this money. I could use this today and go out and do this or do that, or, and experience something that would be great. That's the emotions getting in the way of the will. And the two of them are supposed to work in tandem together. But when it comes to gratification, in order to have delayed gratification, the will has to override the emotions. Let's talk for a minute about disciplining one another, and both disciplining another person disciplining us. Why is it hard for us to receive discipline from someone? I already talked about the American way of individualism, of having a hard time, listening to. I think there's cultures, especially cultures where the elders are respected more, that's a natural thing for elders to correct and guide and rebuke younger people. And so we don't have as much of that in our culture than, say, some other cultures. But why is it hard to receive discipline?
Well, I think you have to admit you were wrong.
Yeah. So
That's the hardest part of the whole thing, to
I
back
messed
off
up.
from what you were trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Because the whole time you're doing it, you're thinking you're right.
Right. Well, you wouldn't have done it if you didn't think you were.
Well, or at least you think you're, if you're trying to do something with a good intention, and then it's like, then you're, then that kind of even almost hurts even more, that if, I meant to do this, and then good for somebody, but then someone else tells you, well, no, that's not a good thing.
Mm. Okay. So in some cases, you have a good intention and you're just doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You feel a little bit like failure too.
Mm.
When someone disciplines you because you're doing it wrong, you feel, failure.
Yeah.
Like, man.
And the word that you used is feel. So again, there's the emotions in, getting into impacting how we're responding to the world. It's very hard for us to receive discipline sometimes because it does play with our emotions a lot.
Well, it's so personal.
Mm-hmm.
It's personal, and it depends too who's disciplining. I think sometimes it depends. Like if it's, I think you accept it more from someone that loves and cares for you. You're gonna take it differently from someone that, maybe you're not as acquainted with or have a close relationship with. I think sometimes if it's someone you respect, I guess, and look up to, you're gonna take it better, I think, than you will someone that you're not so fond of.
Well, and the issue is we're called to be in relationship with each other, and the more relationships break down in a culture, the less people will feel like they can discipline one another, because they'll feel like, I just have to let them be and let them do what they do, because who am I even to tell them? And so the more relationship in a culture breaks down, the harder it would be for discipline to take place.
I was going to say that discipline in the church too has that 3-step process.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure what scripture that's in.
Yeah, go to the person one-on-one.
Yeah.
Bring another, go to that
Elders,
person, and then get the elders involved a third time. Yeah.
And the pastor.
Yeah.
Comes in then too.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, even in the church, we with fellow believers, where if someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I saw you this, and this," instead of our attitude being one of submission, gratitude, of, gosh, I'm so glad you brought this, will you pray with me? Will you help me so I get over this? Even as Christians, we take this attitude sometimes of, well, who are you to tell me what I'm doing? We'd go on the offense.
Mm-hmm.
And
You mean the defense?
or on the defense. I mean,
Yeah.
thank you.
But I think it's because, like what Don said, because you were wrong.
Yeah.
So it's like, nobody wants to be wrong or, wants to. I think most people want to do things right. They want to please people. They want to do things right. They want to be successful. And then when they're disciplined because you're not doing it right, it's just personal. And I think that's why people get defensive. But I think you have to learn to take constructive criticism too. And it's good to learn to give constructively, so that you can also accept it better, I think.
And it's best done in person.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Not a
Not a text.
Facebook post.
Not a Facebook post.
Yeah.
You want to bring that one up again?
All in caps.
Not going there.
Why Marco's not on Facebook?
not going there.
We know, yeah. But you know, I always talk about the grace-truth balance and how the Holy Spirit is our guide to be able to keep those two where they belong. If you move too far towards the grace, then your confrontation ends up being condemning. You don't do confrontation well. You don't discipline another well. You end up condemning them, like the way a Pharisee would. If you go too far on the grace side, then you don't feel like you can confront anybody about anything. There's no discipline. It's every person is just their own little island, and you can do whatever you want. And unfortunately, we are moving in the church in our culture toward more of a grace environment, and this idea of, well, people can just do whatever they want because they're accountable to God. They're not accountable to us. And the truth of the matter is if you're going to be a part of a body of Christ, if you're going to, say, I want to be around other Christians and grow and develop, and I need them around me, then discipline would be a natural part of that. And we can't be an island even though we're all worshiping together on a Sunday morning. It doesn't work that way.
And people definitely don't like confrontation.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm going to confront somebody, it takes a lot of... In my job, it wasn't bad, because we had a hierarchy, chain of command in the fire department or police department, anything like that, or the military, you have a chain of command.
And the expectation within a strong chain of command is people will confront.
You will get confronted.
Right. Yeah.
So it's, and as a captain, I confronted people, and it didn't bother me because I knew that they expected it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and when the church looks more like that, it's easier for confrontation to take place, and as long as the relationships are healthy, and as long as the people who are leading within that hierarchy are healthy. The difficulty is, and this is one of the things about institutions, we ask her, because I was talking to Debbie about this, is why are people against things like hierarchies and institutions and things like that? Is if those become unhealthy, then confrontation happens, but it's not healthy confrontation. And that chain of command starts to break down because people do become I don't respect that person above me, so why should I listen to them? And so the organization structure, if it's there, it has to be healthy for confrontation to work, for discipline to work. If it's not healthy, it'll just end up destroying people. All right, so that is at least a single topic that we talked about from Proverbs chapter 12, and hope you guys have a good evening, those who are watching us, and we will see you next week.